The Crescent Moon Club, in association with ABT, presents Omnibus Unlimited, a roundtable discussion of provocative subjects which must be addressed today. Radiovision for the 21st century and infotainment in its purest essence. Hello again, everyone. I'm Laurence, Nobile, independent researcher and host of Omnibus Unlimited. Tonight, from our ABT studios in Dover, our topic for discussion is medicine, the quantum link. Joining us to address this subject is psychic healer and medical technician Tom Murray. Tom, thanks for being here this evening.
Good evening, Larry. It's a pleasure to be here, as always.
And it's a pleasure to have you, Tom. UFOlogist Dan Murray. Dan, thanks for being here this evening.
Happy I could beam down, Larry.
Happy you could make it too. Scotty seems to have made the link. And of course, seeker and producer of Omnibus Unlimited, John Horrigan. John, thank you very much.
Thank you, Larry. I guess tonight is one of our first shows that we've done on medicine and healing, and we've got Tom to take us there.
That's right, Tom. Medicine. We've seen programs on public television about how the rainforests in Brazil hold many clues for us for medicine, and yet we are destroying it. And in its place of in the place of herbal medicines, we are creating synthetic drugs. The American Cancer Society seems to think that the way to stop cancer is to bombard the entire body with chemicals or radiation, and yet there are those who believe that the way to cure a person is through natural herbs, spices that come right from the living earth, and to use one's mind. Probably the most important part of the whole concept. But talk a little bit about New Age medicine, or medicine and the quantum link. Talk a little bit about that, Tom.
Well, Larry, I like to refer to the idea of a quantum leap because in metaphysics, in the study of metaphysics, which is the power of the mind over matter, you could say, or issues of creation, which means creation of your cellular body as well as the creation of the earth. But generating health, creation of attitudes, is more of a, to most people, what we would call an esoteric or out there type of subject. But if we talk about quantum physics, what we're talking about is research being done in laboratories around the world, in Japan, in Russia, in the United States, at such facilities as UCLA, Berkeley, at MIT. This is cutting-edge science. This is on the edge, what's coming out of laboratories now, and knowledge and wisdom on how a cell becomes a cell, why a cell manufactures itself, replicates itself, and duplicates and divides to become a system, and a system into an organism into a thing such as a human being. And I'd like to paraphrase something with a brief quote from Quantum Healing by the writer Deepak Chopra, who's a medical doctor and practices in the Boston area. Research on spontaneous cures of cancer conducted in both the United States and Japan has shown that just before the cure appears, almost every patient experiences a dramatic shift in awareness. Quote, and I'm going to take a break from that from the second to mention the fact that the man is talking about one's conscious will in an effort to change the direction of his or her disease. The person is not saying, "Doctor, make me well." The person isn't externalizing the desire to get better. The person is internalizing or taking onto their own shoulders the responsibility for the health. Whether they take traditional medicine cures, such as chemotherapy and radiation therapy, or non-American traditional cures, such as acupuncture, herbs, macrobiotics, faith healing, and so forth, it's necessary for the person first to assume mental and emotional responsibility for the illness and the cure of that illness. To quote further, he knows that he will be healed, and he feels that the force responsible is inside himself, but not limited to him. The force extends beyond his personal boundaries, throughout all of nature. The person has to feel I am not limited to my body. All that exists around me is part of myself. I know a lot of people who basically have a high school and college education will say, well, all of everything around me does not relate to me. And this is why I would like to go further into, as I say, quantum physics. Quantum physics is a field of study in which we study the subatomic particles and how they function. Ilya Prigioni of Belgium was awarded the Nobel Prize for Chemistry in 1977. Prigioni basically states that we are one with the world in that, in contrast to the orthodox scientific viewpoint usually practiced by your typical medical doctor, that man is not victim to the universe around him. Rather, Prigioni states, as the Nobel Prize winner, that the human being's biological body interacts intimately with the energy of nature around him. It is also a differing viewpoint from the second law of thermodynamics. The second law of thermodynamics is the law of entropy. And the idea is that if you put X amount of energy into something, say 100 horsepower of energy, you won't get 100 horsepower work out. You'll get maybe 80. Energy is always lost in the mechanics, in the transfer of this. Therefore, there's some kind of a breakdown somewhere. In the law of entropy, it states that with this breakdown enters the situation of chaos. Let's take an enzyme or a molecule, a very complex protein structure that has carbohydrates attached to it. If you put too much heat into that enzyme, the proteins start to stretch, bend weirdly, and the carbohydrates break off, and that enzyme itself breaks down. So it can't function, it can't do its job. This is an example of entropy. So to reverse the second law of dynamics, to reverse the law of entropy, you would have to find a way to take this enzyme and to order itself, to restructure itself to be able to function again. Healers have been able to do this by holding enzymes that have been professionally prepared by research scientists in double-blind studies and that have been exposed to radiation. And by holding these in their hands, they've been able to get these enzymes that have been radiated and causing them to break down to reconstitute themselves into a whole enzyme again. But that's getting more, as I say, into the metaphysics. Let's shoot right back to the laboratory. The old view is of a universe that is running down or breaking down. Again, the law of entropy. This energy becomes lost, and the molecular structure breaks down to become disorganized and chaotic. This chaotic state, this state which, if you were a biblical type of person, you would say is the beginning of the universe when nothing was there, is considered the state of equilibrium. Nature itself, however, exhibits an opposite viewpoint of this law of entropy. For in nature, biological systems that are very organized and very complex continue to grow on the periphery of entropic states. In other words, you may have a situation such as a stagnant pond, which the fish are dying, and negative products such as methane gases and so forth are being produced. But on the edge of that pond, there's new grasses and weeds growing up, there's insects and there's birds feeding. Nature is exhibiting growth on the edges of an entropic position. Therefore, as chaos is promoted in one area, organization and growth is promoted in another. The other interesting phenomenon is that this rate of growth, this rate of production, is faster than the rate of entropy. Larry?
Well, very interesting, and that works very well with Sidus's beliefs about the second law of thermodynamics, which we have talked about before on this show. Specifically, that the second law of thermodynamics, that energy is only lost, flies in the face of the first law of thermodynamics, which states that energy can neither be created nor destroyed. And so, of course, what is the opposite of the second law would have to be something like black holes that absorb light and heat rather than giving off light and heat. But this tapping in to other energy sources is a reality which human beings are just now beginning to recognize on a social scale. Before, it was known to a very few privileged people who were enlightened enough to understand it, but were in a situation where they could not divulge the situation for fear of their life or for fear of being ridiculed. But now in the United States, today at least, in the 90s, and as we approach the 21st century, our society is much more tolerant towards other ideas, new concepts, and so shows such as ours will flourish. But I myself have experienced the gaining of energy, the tapping into the etheric double, as Tom, you and I have talked about before. When I feel a sickness coming on, yes, Tom.
Right, Larry.
When I feel a sickness coming on, I have the capability of tapping into this etheric double and preventing any illness coming on. Now, that is not to say that I am so strong in my abilities that I can withstand, say, radiation poisoning, but for the common cold or the common flu, I am quite capable of taking care of myself. And frankly, I've been somewhat euphoric in understanding my abilities. I suppose I've had this for some time, but I just realized it recently. But Dan Murray, talk a little bit about this. Gaining access to other areas of energy which are around us. We just do not know, most of us do not know how to tap in to very positive energy sources that can help us to live the 130 or so years that our bodies have been constructed to do. Talk a little bit about that.
Weird. Strange. I don't want to talk about that. That's what you hear when you mention that to a lot of people. That is a reaction, immediate reaction you're told from whether it be your parents, your brothers, your sisters, your teachers, your religious leaders. You go to them and you tell them that you've had an experience or you can feel something or you ask them a question and they get tired of hearing why, you know, your younger brothers or your children. And, you know, people want to blow off what they don't want to explain or what they can't explain. So therefore, they don't want to deal with the subject. So if you have the ability to tap into or get, actually, I believe it's more internal than external. You know, that's a very strong point. You know, some people claim to be able to draw off other energy. I believe a lot of it is they're drawing off their own energy, you know, their internal self, and bringing it out and forward to where they need to. And that's, you know, when recorded through time. But trying to explain that to a person who's, quote, non-believer or just doesn't want to deal with that, and they will just refuse to have anything to do with it. Yet it's recorded throughout time in history where people were dying of incurable diseases and cured themselves. And they did it, you know, sometimes it was done through their own self-awareness or it was done through some type of religious ornament or ceremony. Sometimes it was done through visiting a holy place they believed to be holy, and able to channel their inner resources to heal themselves. You know, the stories of Lourdes where you buy a little thing of water and they send it to sick people and they're cured. How much is, you know, I believe some people just need a little catalyst. In other words, they need to believe in something else is going to help them, which is very good. You know, some people say, well, you know, I prayed to God and they got better. So, you know, it is something that works. You know, most people will have no problem with dealing with, okay, the family was praying for you and you got better. Okay? And then you deal with other people where we prayed for you and they died and we're mad at God. And it never occurs to them to think maybe this person didn't have the internal energy left to fight off whatever it was themselves. And that's basically what I believe it is. I believe you can lend assistance from one to the other. I think that's where you get the so-called healers throughout history and time. They have the ability to pass from one to another, or the ability to bring it out in the other's self. And I'm not an expert in this subject, but I've heard of it working and certainly documented in plenty of places. And I myself can understand that for some simple things you need external assistance. And obviously, if you cut your arm bad, you're not going to heal it by thinking about it. You need to stop the bleeding right now, there's certain diseases that you get through viruses. That's an external attack upon the body. Now, whether your inner resources, your white blood cells and stuff can fight it off, it may need some assistance. You may be weak or whatever, and there are certain medications and things that we use to help it out. They do not cure it. That's what people don't understand. All they do is most medicines that people take, and having almost died of pneumonia twice myself, I can verify the medicines they give you do almost nothing for the pneumonia. They kill the symptoms and make it easier for your own body to recover and fight it off, is what it does. So most people are practicing this, not realizing it, and saying, oh, the doctor was wonderful, they gave me this pill and I got better. But I know a lot of people who switch to pills, unlike their parents. In other words, they'll give them vitamins or sugar pills and tell them that it's for their liver or for this and that, and they're doing much better, and they think it's the pill that they're taking. And it's really amazing, but I've had friends who did that.
Yes, the placebo effect is well documented. Yes, John.
Larry, do you have a personal story? Maybe you could give it of how you healed yourself with some sort of infliction. Could you go ahead?
Yes, I wouldn't mind doing that at all, but I'd like to remind you that if you've just joined us, the name of this program is Omnibus Unlimited. I'm Laurence Nobile, joined by Tom Murray, Dan Murray, and John Horrigan. Tonight, our roundtable is discussing medicine, the quantum link. And yes, John, I remember one, and this is the moment in my life when I realized that I had this ability to fend off common colds and flu symptoms. And I was out shooting a video with some friends. That night we went to a friend's house and had a few beers, and as the night went along, I felt something on the back of my throat. I thought at first it was a piece of popcorn that may have lodged itself there, but I tried to work it out using my throat because with the fingers being the dirtiest part of the body, I didn't want to jam my finger down my throat and make it worse than it already was. But it was clear after a while that I was not going to be able to dislodge this thing, so I stuck my finger down my throat and found that it was, in fact, a small growth on my throat. Later inspection showed it to be a strep, the beginnings of strep throat. Well, in laying down in bed that night, getting ready for a night's sleep, and thinking about the prospect of having to deal with a strep throat for the next 7 to 10 days, well, it wasn't a happy prospect, to say the least. I'm too busy a person to be down for 7 to 10 days. So I simply put my entire body on red alert as I was laying there in the darkness, waiting to fall off to sleep. The last few commands I gave my body were to go on to red alert status, to activate my security force, which is my white corpuscles. I directed my white corpuscles to go immediately to my throat area to stop an intruder, and that intruder being the strep. But also commanding the entire body. It's not just, you don't want just your white corpuscles. You've got to get your entire body into this. And because while the white corpuscles are fighting whatever it is in the throat, something else might come from somewhere else. So the entire body is on red alert. I'm sending my white corpuscles, my security force, to the throat area. And those are my commands: to put the body on red alert, send security to the throat area. The next morning I wake up and it is gone. And naturally I make the same check with the flashlight as I made the night before, and the entire large white growth that was the size of a $50 was gone. Well, and of course I might add that once I realized it was gone, I told my body to stand down from red alert, to go back to green alert, that everything is fine, go back to normal condition, and there is no need for any additional activity, because you did what you have to do. And that is when I realized that I was in touch with this, because I had done this several times before in the past, but just kind of laughed at it like any other regular person would laugh at it if I was telling them the story. What do you mean? Well, it sounds like you're on the Starship Enterprise and you're telling security to do this and you're putting the ship on red alert. Well, it is very similar to that. What can I say? And that's why at first I laughed at myself. But after this last episode, I truly am in touch with something which allows me to repair myself a lot easier than I have been able to in the past. Gentlemen, anything to add? Dan?
Yeah, you mentioned Star Trek. I'd just like to mention that some of the latest technology that came out in the late 70s and 80s that are used in all hospitals, both high-tech machinery and biotech machinery, all came from the Star Trek. Not all, but most came from ideas picked up by researchers watching Star Trek. The bed style and the reading of the pulse area and your heartbeat and all that, all at the same time when you lay down on the couch, and the temperature control, the whole 9 yards. There was nothing like that in hospitals before Star Trek came out. The very idea of it was unheard of. But when bones would stick you on the couch there and the readings would come up right above the bed, this gave a lot of researchers a lot of ideas. So it may sound Star Trek-ish to some people, and good, because that's where a lot of ideas are coming from. And if you think that's a lot of hocus pocus, I got news for you. In the Fort Knox, we have an entire vault that is only accessible to high research scientists working directly for the U.S. government and the Pentagon. And the only thing you're going to find in that vault is comic books, because that's where we get a lot of ideas, believe it or not, the government, on the next phase of weaponry.
Very interesting, Tom.
Thank you, Dan. As you mentioned, you're not a psychic healer. I am. But as he was saying, psychic energy, when you're sending somebody psychic energy, they have to accept the energy, just like sending a letter. If they don't accept the letter, it's going to come back to you. Nothing's happened. As we started the show and we said that you have to be open to the healing, you have to take responsible for your cure. Getting back to the idea that as we're talking about this, this is a quantum leap in healing. And time is a factor involved. Time, often you go and the doctor says you have 6 months that you're going to live from this strange disease, or it's going to take you 2 weeks to get better from this cold. How the hell you know, Doc? Time, if it's used by the medical profession, determine the path of a disease, what we call the prognosis. I work in the medical profession. Injured people come in. A question we are asked is, what is the diagnosis? In other words, what's the person's problem? The second question we are asked is, what is the prognosis? In other words, does their recovery look good? Will it be 100%, 50%, or what? And the third thing we're asked is time. How long does it take? I say it depends on the patient, on their attitude. If they're an athlete, if they're a person who's highly motivated, if there's a person who has a mission in life, the recovery will be short. If they come in, they moan, they groan, it's the worst thing that ever happened to them, even if they're not half as badly hurt as the person beside them, the recovery will take a long time, because emotionally and mentally, their quantum desire to change their attitude, their situation, the thing to put them in the hospital in the first place is not there. It has to take that shift in consciousness. Consciousness is an energy force. One has to shift one's energy from point A to point B to accelerate the healing process. Therefore, there is no reason why we can't use time, on the other hand, to our advantage. If the prognosis is one thing, why cannot we be positive? and give a positive prognosis. No less a scientific mind and humanitarian than Albert Einstein was involved in this theory. In one of these men, as I mentioned, Albert Einstein, he's responsible for a very important major concept, again, in quantum physics. What he did is they worked on a theory called the, well, let me see, I think for a second. Okay, as late as 1935, individual events were viewed as random. In other words, whether it's a person walking down the street or a subatomic particle, they were just formulating quantum theory. You couldn't tell whether the event would or wouldn't take place. Is that person going to take a left or a right? Flip a coin. Will that chemical react with that chemical at a subatomic level? Flip a coin. At this point, Albert Einstein's theory of special relativity states that what is known as the law of local causes was in effect, and that a local cause, in other words, an event that can happen, happens at the speed of light or no faster, either the speed of light or slower. Also, in groups of large numbers, in other words, statistical random sampling, statistical events could be predicted events if you had a large enough subatomic sampling, but that similar small discrete events couldn't be individually determined. So this was the problem. These men were stuck with how can you tell if something is or isn't going to happen, if we want to make it happen. So in 1935, Albert Einstein, along with Nathan Rosen and Boris Podolsky, together these three proposed a mathematical theorem which is known as the quantum theory of relativity, which, if it were correct, then if a person had a system with just two particles, I have particle A and particle B and nothing else but space, just two particles were spinning in some direction, this is your random event, something moving. If the spin of one particle were changed, instantaneously at the same time the spin of the other particle changed. Now, according to the theory, it would take time for consciousness of the second particle to be aware the first particle moved. But there was no time. There was no instantaneous delay. It was simultaneous. Therefore, a thought or some activity transpired between the two at the same time. Later, in 1972, this was proved out by Professor John Clausen, who worked with the field in John S. Bell, which is known as Bell's theorem. I'm talking kind of fast because we're kind of short on time here. But anyway, basically it was determined that if I do something, it affects some other place in the universe, and that all things are interconnected. So that if I think negatively about my health, I am affecting other people's health and my own. If I think positively, if I seek positive means, and become responsible for my health, I can take that quantum leap and start to heal.
And that will have to end our discussion of medicine, the quantum link. I'd like to thank our guests for appearing on tonight's show, psychic healer and medical technician Tom Murray. Tom, thank you for that wonderful dissertation. That was just excellent.
I think that's the fastest I've ever explained Bell's theorem.
And you did it so well. UFOlogist Dan Murray. Dan, thanks for being here this evening.
Beaming back up, Larry.
Make it so. Seeker and producer of Omnibus Unlimited, John Horrigan. John, great show.
Yeah, thanks, Larry. Tom, very eloquent, and Dan, a lot of poignant ideas.
Indeed. I'd just like to add that our visual backdrop for tonight's show was provided by ABT. Having said that, Omnibus Unlimited is seeking artists and videographers to display their works on our visual backdrop of various episodes of Omnibus Unlimited. If you're an artist or videographer and would like to have your work displayed on this show, send your name, address, phone number, and area of study to Omnibus Unlimited, Box 577, Dover, Massachusetts, 02030-0577, and perhaps your work will appear on Omnibus Unlimited. For the rest of our audience, if you have any questions, comments, suggestions, or if you'd like to be a guest on Omnibus Unlimited, that address once again is Omnibus Unlimited, Box 577, Dover, Massachusetts, 02030-0577. All letters will be answered on upcoming episodes of Omnibus Unlimited. I'm Laurence, Nobile, independent researcher and host of Omnibus Unlimited. For all of us here at Omnibus Unlimited, thank you for your attention, good night, and good luck. Omnibus Unlimited is a presentation of ABT and the Crescent Moon Club. This program is the property of ABT. Any broadcast, rebroadcast, or other use of the accounts and descriptions of this program without the expressed written consent of ABT is strictly encouraged.
Hi, I'm Dan Murray. Join me and the rest of the crew as we discuss the CIA cover-up of aliens on this planet. How many bases are there in and around the United States? 4. Want to hear about them? Want to know where they are? Want to know why your cancer cannot be cured, according to the medical profession? Want to know what is going on in the U.S. Air Force today that they don't tell you about? Want to know where your medical and your money for the military is really going to? Who and what does the government know that they don't want you to know? Join us as we discuss these things on Omnibus Unlimited, the only show that is going to tell you what is really going on in the world and around and on the other worlds that have been here all along today. Thank you.